to Politically Speaking. I'm Elizabeth Bennion, Chancellor's Professor of Political Science and Director of Community Engagement at Indiana University, South Bend. After closing in 2020, the Palisades nuclear power plant in Covert, Michigan plans to reopen by 2025. State legislators have also come together to put forward a new nuclear energy legislation in the state. Joining us to discuss the future of nuclear power in Michigan are Representative Joey Andrews of St. Joseph and Representative Graham Filler of St. John's. I want to start by asking about the Palisades power plant. Representative Andrews, can you explain the significance of reopening the plant for Michigan's energy landscape?
Yeah, so the Palisades plant up in Covert is about 800 megawatts worth of electricity. That's somewhere in the neighborhood of 1 million houses that's able to power. And with the contract that the co-ops have with the power plant, that means that every co-op in Michigan will now be 100% clean generating.
Now, Representative Filler, what steps are being taken to ensure the safety and reliability of the Palisades power plant as this happens?
Sure. So there was a lot of outreach at the start when Holtec purchased Palisades and then started saying, well, we're actually not going to decommission it. We want to put it back online. And the conversation is not, it's not just people in the state talking. It's not just people in this country. It's actually people all across the world, because they've never taken a decommissioned nuclear plant and put it back online in the history of sort of nuclear energy generation. And so everyone's watching to see if they can do it. And so far, every step of the way, Holtec has proved that that Palisades is ready to get back online. But I was just in Washington, D.C. for a nuclear energy conference, and I talked to a delegation from Japan. I talked to people from Texas. I mean, people are just really watching Palisades to see if it's possible. Now, you talked about the safety. It seems that Palisades or Holtec went in there and said, boy, this looks great. Clearly, we need to spend some money on technological upgrades and safety, but we're ready to go.
So it sounds like all eyes are on this reopening and this relaunch of a decommissioned plant. Does that make you feel nervous or safer knowing that all of these folks are watching, but also giving the green light?
Yeah, so I don't get nervous about that, because I'm just such a believer in nuclear energy and its role in the way we power homes and businesses and just our way of life. And so I think it's really been exciting to see the bipartisan support for getting Palisades back online. We've got the Energy Secretary, Jennifer Granholm, who's been a remarkable supporter, Governor Gretchen Whitmer, Representative Andrews and I have been leaders on it, along with other people in the state Senate here in Michigan. And so, no, only excited. And I think one thing to mention, because of The Simpsons and because of Chernobyl, people have this concept of, everything turns green and the town explodes or whatever. And it's just completely unrealistic, A. And B, Michigan's been a top 10 nuclear state for a long time. And we have 3 power plants, and they've existed with 0 issues and powered, a quarter of Michigan's energy needs every year for many, many years. And so if people knew how safe these were and how much safer they've even gotten with some modern technology, I think they would be a little more confident.
I always tell people too, the NRC, the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, isn't exactly known for being lax. So the fact that they've been through the plant, I think several hundred times at this point, and they're comfortable with it turning back on, tells you that the level of safety in the plant has got to be very high.
Now, one of the things that you already mentioned is bipartisan support. The two of you are from opposite sides of the aisle, as they sometimes say. Do you feel like there was a lot of convincing to do of either party, or is this view widely shared among legislators that they're mostly just positive and very enthusiastic about this?
Yeah, I think in Michigan we're pretty lucky to have a bipartisan, what I would call a bipartisan consensus on nuclear energy. Not to say that everybody on both sides of the aisle is universally supportive, but when the opportunity to restart Palisades came up, I think everybody saw what the opportunity was here, not just to have the clean energy, but also the jobs and what it means from a national, international perspective. So, I think future's pretty bright for nuclear in Michigan with the legislature we have right now.
Yeah,
That's
and I want
good.
to add to that, which is I had a bill signed by the governor 2022, 2021 that said we need to study nuclear energy in the state of Michigan. And when I started having the talks to try to get that bill through the legislature, you had a Republican House and a Republican Senate led, very close though, and a Democratic governor. And the more I talked with people, especially on the Democrat side, there was sort of this, hey, we've been told to be scared of nuclear energy, but we're not. But, we've been told that everything is Chernobyl, but it's not. And we really want to bring clean, reliable, powerful energy to Michigan. And I could feel that tide turning a little bit after many years of people just not talking about nuclear. And then the bill was signed and did go to the governor's office and eventually became law. And a very, what I would call effective and straightforward study was released earlier this year. So I think the mood is changing across the country, probably across the world. There was about a 10-year run when you just couldn't talk about nuclear for whatever reason, right around Fukushima and after Fukushima in Japan. But I think we're trending in a really good direction.
No, I would love it if each of you would talk a little bit about the issue of the local economy and the job market. What will this mean for the local economy there in Michigan and surrounding that plant in particular?
Yeah, so Covert Township, where the plant is located, is a pretty low income, lot of poverty within the township. In Van Buren County, the county that Covert Township is in, is one of the poorer counties in the state. It's a heavily agricultural economy in that county, and so when Palisades started shutting down, the county and the township took tens of millions of dollars in hit on losing taxable revenue. Not to mention economic activity. So the repowering of this plant is an enormous turnaround there. The school system in Covert by itself, this basically completely reverses their budget troubles with this plant coming back online. And then, the jobs that the plant creates are all six-figure jobs, almost all union labor. So they just brought on 250 more employees over the last 3 months. It's 250 more people in the local economy making, more than $100,000 a year, spending their disposable income in Michigan. And every outage that the plant goes through when they have to do, the upgrades and refueling and that sort of thing is more than 1,000 construction jobs. Again, all union labor, all, in the six-figure range. And those jobs every 18 months or so, will be created and boost the local economy, local small businesses, hotels, et cetera. So that's, I think, one of those hidden, I call it the hidden benefit of nuclear power. All the giant bucket of clean electricity is great. And obviously that, one of the main reasons we need it. But these plants can basically single-handedly support the economy of a region, like Cook does just to our south and Palisades does just to our north.
Yeah, and those are, Joyce, Representative Andrews is so right. And it's almost even bigger than that even, because you've got DTE has Fermi down in Monroe, and that's been amazing for that community. And that's a community that's a big power generating community. They had a coal plant that's now going to become something else. And if you talk to folks down there, they will say, thank God it's here. My uncle works here. It attracts people from, engineers to come work here. And then there's even a next level to that, which is Representative Andrews and I really want Michigan to be the go-to nuclear state in the country. And we're talking not just about people coming in to work at, say, Fermi or Palisades. We're talking about people coming in to get an education at Michigan or Michigan State. We're talking about engineers to come work around the plant. We're talking even about manufacturing. Let's bring nuclear manufacturing of technology and parts and even SMRs when they get rolling to Michigan. Let's make Michigan the #1 nuclear state. And that's a powerful thing when you can talk about it more than just energy creation.
So it sounds like that's one of the ways, not only that you hope to really create that robust economy in the state, but also to sell it to voters who may have those older concerns about safety or that mindset that nuclear is bad, to get them to listen more closely.
Yeah, that's 100% right. And I think one of the great conversation is what's next. And so we have 3 big reactors here in Michigan. And that's exciting. And they pump out clean, reliable energy. Well, 2 of them do. We hope to get the 3rd back online. But what about SMRs, which is small modular reactors, which is where a lot of the nuclear industry is heading? Can Michigan be a leader on that? That's part of our legislative package. And what comes with that? Manufacturing comes with that. Can we create the parts for SMRs here? And I think once you talk to the public about SMRs and how they're unbelievably safe and how you could stack a couple of them, how Dow in Midland could run their entire factory off one SMR, you're just talking about game-changing possibilities.
It's the same with Hemlock Semiconductor. An SMR could power most of their operation. And Palisades, Holtec is planning on making Palisades the site for some of their first small modular reactors. So in the next couple of years, they plan to break ground on 2 SMRs up there, which, there's a few different sites around North America where these are being sited right now. But depending on how quickly processes move, Palisades could be the site of the first SMRs in North America.
Wow, that is a big breakthrough. Can you talk a little bit more about some of the legislative package that you've put together in terms of nuclear energy in Michigan? What are other things that Michigan viewers, but also viewers in Indiana and across the country should know about?
Yeah, so we Representative Filler and I have been working on this package for almost a year now, actually, I think. And we introduced it a few months ago in the legislature, waiting on a hearing in the Energy Committee right now in the House for it. But what we saw in conversation with the Nuclear Energy Institute and our local power providers who have nuclear plants is the SMRs offer a pretty huge opportunity for our state, like Representative Filler said before, both in manufacturing and in terms of what's next for our old coal infrastructure and getting off of fossil burning and that sort of thing. So we created a package that's designed to draw workforce to the state. Engineers and nuclear workforce primarily, but there's also a tax credit in the package in the bill that Representative Wenzel has that would create a credit for the manufacture of SMRs. And a lot of these companies, because SMRs are such a new technology, are looking for which state is going to be home for them as they start to manufacture these. And we think that Michigan has everything that you need to make it the center of this industry, and that's the goal of our package.
Now, if I understand correctly, one of the things you also seek to do is to define advanced nuclear reactors in state law. Can you talk a little bit about that and why it would be important to do that?
Yeah, sure. So SMRs, small modular reactors, are the size of, let's call it sometimes this room I'm in, a decent sized playroom. And that's a lot smaller than a gigantic nuclear reactor. So what it does is it cuts the price from 15 billion to 1 billion, something like that. But we're not quite there technology wise, and we're waiting for some of the technology to be approved at a national level. What we want is Michigan law to be in a great shape, a really pro SMR, pro nuclear regulatory way, so that when SMRs start to go online, maybe even in Palisades, one rogue commissioner or one person in the regulatory structure can't stop that. We can already say the legislature, both Republicans and Democrats, spoke loudly and said, here's how we define SMRs. Here's what an SMR is. It can be in Michigan. It's been approved by a bipartisan legislature. You also look at the state of Illinois that has had some real issues in the past year about defining SMRs and supporting new nuclear, and that's what we're trying to avoid.
I wonder about that partnership and collaboration with the state and federal governments in terms of creating this nuclear environment, nuclear energy friendly environment in Michigan. What kind of relationship are you hoping for there?
Yeah, I mean, it's mostly federal. And that's why I think state legislatures have kind of ignored it for a long time, or been able to speak the way we've been seeing a lot of power in the last year, where almost every state in the country has put forward pro-nuclear legislation. Some of it has been signed, some of it has not made it through the legislature. But before, states pretty much ignored it and said, you know, we got to keep our hands off. The Nuclear Regulatory Commission approves this. They take design builds, they approve or they disapprove. And so we'll just wait on them. States have begun to take a proactive approach. And so in Michigan is kind of the gold standard right now for how a state can show a good atmosphere, a good pro-nuclear energy atmosphere, and then work collaboratively with federal regulators and the energy department.
Yeah, I think the important thing is, of course, nuclear is going to be most heavily regulated at the federal level. It has to be. You can't have variable standards happening. So, of course, that's got to be the case. But the issue is that in most states, what they're seeing is a lot of partisanship around the issue. And I think, from what we've heard, Michigan is emerging as one of the few states where there's, kind of a bipartisan consensus that nuclear power is good. We should be leaning into advanced reactor technology. Having a bipartisan package instead of just a partisan package. And for the industry, that's really helpful because, if you're going to build a nuclear reactor, you're planning on a decades-long investment. You're not in and out. And so, I think the industry wants to be able to know that regardless of which political party is in power at any given time, their investments are safe. And I think that's, the message we're trying to send to them is that, in Michigan, you can be here for the long haul.
Yeah, that seems very important, and especially in a state where we have seen the majority in the legislature switch, who holds the governor's mansion switch over time. That level of stability has to be reassuring for any companies looking to invest.
Yeah, so this is one of the arguments, and I know Representative Andrews makes this same argument, but when you have a nuclear power plant, right off the bat, utilities and others sort of naturally complain it costs too much. It's not as cheap as wind and solar, and maybe that's true right off the bat. But investment in nuclear, yes, it takes a little more at the start, but then you have 40, 50, 60, 80 years of clean, reliable energy and incredibly minimal waste. That sits in triple concrete encased casks. And so the investment, I would argue, is a really good investment. It just takes a little convincing for those with the dollars.
And importantly, as like our whole economy is electrifying and chip manufacturing and data centers and that sort of thing become a bigger and bigger part of what we do, we need reliable, consistent, and constantly flowing electricity. Wind and solar are great for providing what they do with peak load management, which is also very important. But if you need a hyperscale data center running around the clock 24 hours a day, or if you're manufacturing semiconductors or manufacturing batteries for that matter, you need a lot of electricity and you need it to be reliable. And so, states that embrace this technology, SMRs and advanced reactors, are going to naturally get a leg up in advanced manufacturing and the knowledge economy. So this is just part of, keeping us ahead of the pack in those industries as well.
Yeah, and people are talking about AI and data centers now more and more. And then they're talking about, well, what do we need and what do we want to power these data centers? And a lot of the time, the answer right now is nuclear energy, the existing nuclear fleet, or eventually plugging SMR right into and running that data center. Why? Why does that sound so good? First of all, it's clean. Second of all, it's reliable, right? The nuclear, you turn it up, you turn it down. It's an amazing technology. And that's what you want. You just want powerful, reliable, clean energy to run these data centers or similar technological centers.
I want to follow up on 2 points. One, the waste, and the other, that knowledge economy. In terms of nuclear waste, that is the thing often that people are concerned about, any leaking, what that means for the environment. So could you address those concerns briefly?
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of those concerns are honestly media overblown. Like Representative Filler said at the beginning, people will watch The Simpsons or something like that, and they get this idea in their head. But if we look back, I think 3 Mile Island is always pointed to as the most significant American event. But in the decades since 3 Mile Island, the all of the research that's come on that incident shows that there was actually no negative health implications from it. It was addressed and it was locked down, and it turns out that the concerns that were raised at the time, the science has borne out that it actually wasn't a problem. I've grown up kind of sandwiched between two nuclear power plants here in St. Joe, and for those viewing who haven't been here yet, I promise that none of us are walking around with 11 toes and 3 arms. It's all been totally normal and fine. We all swim in Lake Michigan up and downstream from these plants, and there's no negative health implication. Fukushima was a rare incident that had a lot of kind of compounding factors with the tsunami and the earthquake and its geographic location and the emergency response. That's not the case with, we don't have tsunamis in Lake Michigan. And the American nuclear industry responded to Fukushima by requiring every single plant to have an offsite disaster ready response just in case. So, I think that if you divorce yourself a little bit from the sensationalism that you can get in the media, and you actually just look at the facts, nuclear power is one of the safest forms of energy we have. Coal ash is more radioactive than what comes out of a nuclear power plant. So, but that doesn't get nearly as much media attention because it's nuclear it can be a scary word, but it shouldn't be. So.
And if I say if the general public knew the amount of nuclear waste created, spent fuel rods, essentially could in the history of Michigan's nuclear power generation, you could take all the waste and it would be, I don't know, 2 or 3 football fields. It's remarkably little, and we haven't suffered any leaking, any issues. Every state that has nuclear across the country has sort of had the same situation, right? We would love a national answer to this, and there was some discussion on that, but about 15 years ago, that stopped the Yucca Mountain conversation. However, in the meantime, the waste has not been an issue. There has not been damage to communities, and if you talk to these communities who have nuclear plants, they are generally almost 100% supportive.
And I want to talk a little bit more about the educational aspects of your plans there in Michigan. The legislation includes a grant program for educational programs that support the nuclear industry. I wonder if you could talk a little bit about why that's important and how that fits into your larger workforce development plans.
So Michigan has, MSU and University of Michigan in particular that are, 2 of the top universities in the country. And we already train a lot of this workforce. U of M's engineers come out of their nuclear engineering program and they go off to other states working in the industry. And so what we wanted to do was invest in keeping that talent here, and then also attracting talent from neighboring states. If you went to, Indiana, IUSB, or you went to, University or, Ohio State or University of Illinois, something like that, that Michigan is a state you could look at in your backyard that would have attractive workforce incentives to come and work here. And when you bring the workforce, the industry comes with it. Industry wants to be where the workers are. So part of that workforce attraction and employment attraction is, we can tell the industry we're a place that workers in this industry are going to want to be. So you should want to be here too, because it'll be easier for you to find workers. And as we're trying to draw population to the state, industry and workforce is the tip of the iceberg there.
Yeah, and that's right. And Michigan is now competing with other states for everything. And you're surrounded by Midwestern states who are mostly smaller than Michigan, maybe don't have the Great Lakes. And so what are they doing to attract workers? Well, I can tell you, Michigan has more plants than all of the Midwestern states, I believe, except for Illinois. And we want to compete with other states, and we want to beat the other states. That's really at the heart of some of our plan, is to turn this into not just a discussion about nuclear energy generation, but about making Michigan an attractive state to live, work, and play.
And how does that fit into your overall sort of energy standards and energy goals plans for the state?
Yeah, so we created what I think is a very forward-thinking climate plan last year. Instead of just narrowing in on one or two technologies, we created a technology neutral plan that says, as long as by 2040 our electric use is clean, by standard meaning they're not producing carbon, then it's good. So that opens the doors for nuclear in Michigan. That opens the doors for a lot of other emerging technologies. And who knows, 20 years from now, maybe we're all talking about nuclear fusion instead of nuclear fission. But our climate plan allows for that. So for me, going into that process, that was really important because I think the easiest way for us to decarbonize is to invest in nuclear. And, as we've seen, the federal government agrees. DOE said that they want to more than double the nuclear power production of the country in the next decade to 20 years. The countries around the world are saying the same thing, that they want to, double their nuclear output, if not more. The only way we're beating climate change is with robust nuclear infrastructure. And I think, we did a good job in Michigan, and we're continuing to do a good job in Michigan to, lean into what is just going to be the best practice.
Well, unfortunately, this has just flown by, but that is all the time we have for this week's episode of Politically Speaking. This has been incredibly informative. I know that viewers will learn a lot from watching this episode, so I want to thank you both, Michigan State Representatives Joey Andrews and Graham Filler. I'm Elizabeth Bennion, reminding you that it will take all of us to make democracy work.
This WNIT local production has been made possible in part by viewers like you. Thank you.